this time we'll be discussing the second literary criticism, which is reader response criticism. So, tinatawag din itong reader-oriented criticism, pero it is the term that is widely used is reader response. Let's have a brief background of reader response theory. Okay, katulad nga ng binanggit natin, di ba? Theory naman talaga ang pinanggagalingan ng mga literary approaches itong mga approaches na to in analyzing literature. So, this theory gained prominence in the late 1960s that it focuses on the reader audience reaction to a particular text, perhaps more than the text itself. So we are considering now what are the points, what are the views of the readers with regard to how the literary works were written or how the content was presented. So isa yun sa mga tinitingnan din sa reader response. Kaya reader response. So what is the response of the reader with regard to the text that they read? So the theory is popular in both the United States and Germany. Its main theories include Stanley Fish, David Bleich, and Wolfgang Iser. Okay? W kasi pinopronounce as V, di ba? Kaya Wolfgang Iser. So, um, of them, it is easier na talagang talagang may malaking contribution in terms of the popularity of reader response. So kapag pinag-usapan ang reader response theory, it is always attributed to Wolfgang Iser, although Stanley Fish and David Bleich, two, these two also have their contributions naman. But again, it's Wolfgang Iser who really did a lot of study, really did a lot of explanation in terms of reader response theory. Okay, so what are then the theoretical assumptions of reader response theory? So literature is a performative art, and each reading is a performance. So ang mga readers kasi may kanya-kanya silang tinatawag experiences while reading a text. Yung experiences nila while reading the text is what we call the performative art. So, yung kanilang way of reading it, yung kanilang interpretation of the text, yung experience in totality or in general is what we call the performative art. So, the literary text possesses no fixed and final meaning, literary meaning, which is created by interaction of the text and reader. So, tama yung sinabi ni Lem kanina na there's no standard way of analyzing a literary text, which is unlike with um, formalism or new criticism that they really need to dig into the details. When we talk of dig into details, they have to look at the literary elements. So, kay 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 reader response, pwede niyang gamitin din yon. Napaka-hybrid nga ni reader response eh. So, pwede niya rin gamitin yung approach na ginamit kay formalism. So, kung sa tingin, hindi naman siya talaga required na gumamit ng mga literary elements. Ito ang kagandahan kay reader response, which is unlike kay formalism na, okay, you are required to dig into the details or the elements of a certain literary work. Okay? So, reader here is not passive but active. Kasi pag we talk of passive na responsive, di ba? We talk of passive. So, a reader must be an active performer. Pag sinabi nating active performer, it means that si reader habang binabasa niya yung kanyang binabasa, nandoon yung kanyang comprehension, inuunawa niya yung kanyang binabasa, at habang binabasa niyo yun, may naglalaro sa isip niya, halimbawa ay, tama ba itong ginagawa ng character sa kwento? Tama ba yung choice of words? Tama ba yung diction na ginamit dito? Tama ba yung sentence structure? So, nagiging, yun, that is an example of performative art. That's an example of reading performance on part of the reader. Hindi lang to basta yung ginagawa niyo habang nagbabasa kayo na binabasa niyo with feelings. It's not only that. Performance or reading performance, nangyayari yan inside our brain. Okay? So the role of the reader cannot be ignored. That's according to Iser. Hindi mo dapat i-ignore ang role ng reader kasi ang reader may kanyang interpretation yan. So, ano yung dinedebunk nitong reader response? So, sinasabi nila na, okay, ang author, hindi porke siya nagsulat niyan, siya na lahat, yan at mismo yung kanyang real life experiences, di ba? Hindi porke siya yung author niyan, yan na rin yung buhay niya. So, yun yung sinasabi ng reader response. So, posibleng yung sinulat ng author might be different from how it will be interpreted by the reader. Okay? Hindi porke yun yung interpretasyon ng reader, hindi yun na rin yung interpretasyon ng author. So sinasabi rito na sa reader response na there is always a possibility that the intention of the author may be different on the perceived intention of the reader, and that should not be taken out. It should be acknowledged. Kaya sinasabi rito, acknowledge the importance of text and the reader. So, there is a text relationship with reader. Katulad nga ng binanggit ko, yung text relationship na sinasabi natin doon is how the reader interpret the text, how the reader analyze the text, how the reader perceive the text, okay, how the reader um, feel about reading the text. Does he like it or not? Okay? So here, reader is a third party. Kasi ang pag sinabi nating literary work, ang magkarelasyon ay ang writer at ang text, 'di ba? Sila yung talagang magkarelasyon diyan. So, kino-consider na ang reader ay third party. Ano bang ginagawa ng third party? Ano bang ginagawa ng kabit? 'Di ba? Ang ginagawa ng third party or ng kabit, so nangingialam siya. So, pero dito hindi naman niya totally sinisira kung ano yung relasyon ng reader ng writer at ng text. Hindi naman niya intensyon na sirain. Siya, tinitingnan niya lang naman dito yung pag nag-intervene na ba si reader doon sa text na binabasa niya, what then will be the interpretation. Pareho ba kami na mag-isip ng author or hindi? It does not necessarily mean in terms of reader response. Reality exists in reader's mind, not in the author's mind. Okay? So, kung ano yung experience, ito ang kagandahan kay reader response. Kung ano yung experiences noong reader, real life experiences ng reader, pwede niyang ma-relate ito ngayon doon sa text na binabasa niya. Siya mismo ang mag-validate kung yung rinireflect doon sa kwentong yun o doon sa binabasa niyang poetry is the same thing na na-experience niya. Kaya minsan, di ba, napapaisip tayo, pagkapag tayo ay may napapanood na isang palabas, di ba, sa isang pelikula, sinasabi natin, posible bang mangyari yan? Okay, posible bang mangyari? Di ba meron tayong mga ganong mga thoughts sa ating isipan na, of course, set aside natin yung mga fantasies, mga fantasies na fantasy na ang theme ng isang kwento ay fantasy. Yung mga uh, uh, sinasabi nating mga tao mismo ang gumaganap, mga buhay na tao at walang kinalaman yung mga fantasy diyan. So, iniisip natin to, posible talaga mangyari na gawin ng isang tao yung ganyang gawain. Posible bang gawin ng isang lalaki yung ginagawa niya sa babae niya. So, meron tayong mga ganon na thoughts in mind. So, hence, reality exists in reader's mind. Ito nga ay kumo-question sa konsepto ng realism kasi kung reality exists in reader's mind sa philosophy, then do we have a general truth? Do we have a general na reality talagang masasabi? Kung reality exists in reader's mind, what might be real to me might not be real to you because of our differing experiences, because of our differing views in life. So, isa rin yun sa mga question dito sa reader's response. Okay? So, another salient feature of reader response is work is fully created when readers assimilate it. Pag sinabi, yung work na tinutukoy rito ay literature. So, literary work is fully created when readers assimilate it. When we talk of when readers assimilate it, the reader is now um, dissecting every details. Sabi ng reader response, once the reader dissected a particular literary text, that is when a literary work is fully created. Based on the premise na sinabi natin kanina na may kanya-kanyang interpretation ang mga reader sa text. Thus, um, there's a tendency nga that text has no inherent meaning. Okay, pag sinabi kasi na, at sinabi rin 'di ba natin na it does not always follow na dahil nga yun yung sinabi ng dahil nga yung interpretation natin, yun na rin yung interpretation ng author. It does not always follow. Okay? So these are the salient features of reader response theory. Okay. So there are different types of responses. Meron tayong tinatawag na initial emotional response. Ito yung habang binabasa natin, 'di ba, medyo kinikilig kayo, naiiyak kayo, natutuwa kayo, nagagalit kayo, nayayamot kayo, or it could be your emotional response not that is your that's your initial emotional response while reading. So, pwede rin siguro na um, yung emotional response mo could be your experience while reading it. Okay? Kasi ang initial emotional response could be your the feelings that you feel while reading it. Iba rin yung experience mo habang binabasa mo, magkaiba yon. Kaya halimbawa, example, habang binabasa mo yon ay nayayamot ka doon sa binabasa mo kasi napapangitan ka or natutuwa ka kasi maganda yung binabasa. Yun yung external na emotion na nararamdaman mo as a reader. Pero habang binabasa mo yon, kinikilig ka, nai-inlove ka, natatakot ka, nalulungkot ka, yun yung kumbaga internal emotional response doon mismo sa text mo na na-acquire. Okay? So, another response is what we call the interpretive. So, it's related to explaining or understanding the meaning of something. So, ito'y habang nagbabasa ka. Habang nagbabasa ka, you are not trying to, from the term itself, like interpret. You're trying to get what is the meaning of the said text. Okay? So, yung ginagawa mo habang nagbabasa ka or while reading or after reading. So, in-interpret mo, ano ba yung mga symbols na to? Ano ba yung meaning ng mga setting na to? Bakit kaya ganun yung kilos ng character? Yung dialogue ba ng character ay akma doon sa kanyang sinasabi? Okay? Or ang dialogue ba ng character ay akma doon sa edad niya? Para namang hindi makatotohanan yung pagkilos noong pagkilos ng isang character dito doon sa kanyang sitwasyon. Okay? Pwedeng ganun din yung pwede mong tingnan. Okay? So, it could also be an analysis. Okay? It is now a detailed explanation. Okay? Kumbaga ito is mas malalim sa interpretive. So, a detailed examination of anything complex in order to understand its nature or to determine its essential features. So, kung sa interpretive, you're just understanding the meaning of the text. So, sa analysis ngayon is you go beyond that. Kumbaga, what you're trying to do now is you're trying to look at the essential features or the essential of the essence of the meaning derived. So, ano ba yung essence ng meaning derived? Ano ba yung kahalagahan ng interpretations mo doon sa text na yon? Para saan ba yon? Okay? Another responses could be summary. Okay, from the term itself, sa-summarize mo lang naman yung binasa mo. Pero napaka-shallow nito. It's that, kumbaga parang pagkatapos mong panoorin yung isang pelikula, pinakwento mo, nag-summarize lang siya. Or matapos mong basahin isang literary text, pinakwento mo, nag-summarize lang siya. Okay, that's summary. Pero napaka-shallow niya. Next is arguing with author. It could be ah, hindi ka sumasang-ayon doon sa author. Ito naman, intertextuality. Medyo malalim rin ang intertextuality. So, the complex interrelationship between a text and other text taken as basic to the creation or interpretation of text. Ang intertextuality ay tinitignan mo ngayon, sinisipat mo ngayon yung isang literary works sa isang literary works. Okay? Halimbawa ay meron kang nabasang isang literary works na parang habang binabasa mo ito, parang meron kang nakikitang parehong estilo or parang may nakikita kang ah, pinagpat pinagkunan niya ng pattern habang binabasa mo yung buong text. Intertextuality ang tawag doon. Kaya nga di ba, parang pumatong, intertextuality. Okay? So I have here some examples.
The set of films gave a roller coaster ride of emotions. Since they are short films, there are moments that I spent few minutes of laughter, then without having yet subsiding from the previous emotion, I instantly need to shift to being sad in the next film. It is indeed successful in bringing entertainment, but more than just this purpose, these films leave a lesson about life. I must say, those films premiered in Pelikula achieved its goals in reflecting the reality about
Yeah.
life.
Thank you, Lem. So that is an example of initial emotional response. So binanggit lang diyan kung ano nararamdaman noong reader doon sa kanyang napanood o binasa. Okay? So by the way, pwedeng gamitin ang reader response sa mga films kasi ang film is still a text. The audience are the readers. So pwedeng gamitin pang ano yun. Okay? Thank you, Lem. This is not an example of interpretive. Um, Ras, pakibasa Ras, interpretive.
Interpretive. The film Tia Benin, writer and directed by Ralph Iano, depicted a mother who suffered from Alzheimer's. We should not settle for just looking at the literal depiction of love of the mother to her daughter despite the memory loss. Instead, one can see the contrasting elements of using the fire and the rain to indicate the relationship between Benny and her daughter.
Okay. So, take note of those highlight. Thank you, Russell. Take note of those highlighted lines. Instead, one can see the contrasting elements of using the fire and the rain to figuratively depict the relationship between Bening and her daughter. So this time, di ko na kasi linagay lahat, but I am introducing here of interpreting the fire and the rain in its relationship in the film, because in the film there is a fire and there is a rain, which are set as symbols, and what then will be the meaning of the set of symbols, the fire and the rain, kasi sa literature ang tawag natin dito ay binary concept. Okay, sa structuralism meron tayong tinatawag na binary. Okay, dito ang binary is the fire and the rain, but it should not end with just stating that they are binaries. They have to be interpreted. What then is the essence of fire and the rain in the film or in the story? How it can be related in the lives of the characters. So, pero it should not be overread kasi may tendency tayong maging ganyan. But makikita naman kasi doon sa storya kung papaano na-emphasize yung fire tsaka ang rain. So with that, try to interpret what is the meaning of the fire and the rain in the depiction of the lives between Bening and her daughter. Okay?
Analysis. Wawa, written and directed by Anj Makalan, is a story about young boy's journey as they take his father to his final resting place. One thing that is noticeable in this film is its absence of dialogue. There is only a part in the story when the bereaved family offer the prayer to which I think cannot be counted as dialogue. Translating this treatment in the story makes sense to the film. It is not for aesthetic purpose. It is how lamenting should be, to offer a moment of silence to the grieving family.
Okay, so yung line na translating this treatment in the story makes sense with the film. It is not for aesthetic purpose, it is how the meeting should be to offer a moment of silence to the grieving family. So I am now introducing the way I will be analyzing the text. Okay? So, pansin nyo, sa interpretation, meron tayong mga linilift na mga symbols. Meron tayong linilift na mga actions, dialogues na binibigyan natin ng meaning. That is how interpretive should be. While in analysis, um, may pagka-interpretation din siya, pero mas malalim ang ating pagtingin kasi rinirelate na natin siya sa actual scenario, real life experience. Rinirelate na natin siya sa society, pwede yon. Rinirelate na natin siya sa buhay mismo ng tao. Okay? So, ganon. That's how analysis works.
Summer, the summary is the story weaves the tale of a DH struggling to provide the needs of her family while trying to save money to pursue her dream to work as a nurse in Canada. She is a licensed nurse in the Philippines, yet she tried to eat her pride just to her family. And here is Ethan, that is, unlike Joy, is a happy-go-lucky guy who becomes obsessed of love that he chose to follow his then girlfriend in the US and let go of the dream of their family to stay for good in Hong Kong. His then girlfriend chose to chase her dream and left him. This affected him so much. Instead of helping his family, he became a burden to them. While trying to move on to his life as a bartender, he found in an unexpected place of a woman who has many sideline business and other part-time job, which is prohibited for DH in Hong Kong. With Ethan's eagerness to pursue her, they end up loving each other. However, they have to choose between what they want to do and what they have to do. What they want is to stay in each other's arms, and what they have to do is to pursue each other's dream separately. For Joy, to work as a nurse in Canada, and for Ethan, to establish his own bar business in Hong Kong. Oh, so it's
Ayan, manood ako yun ng Hello, Love, Goodbye. Okay. So, yeah, that's an example of summer. By the way pala, natutunan ko lang kahapon dun sa workshop namin ni Cream na sabi sa akin nung mentor namin is kapag magsa-summarize daw ng mga ganito sa criticism, it has to be presented in present tense. So, tip yan sa inyo. Ito kasi ay dati ko pa sinulat and I was not aware that there is a tense that should be followed when summarizing a story. So sabi niya sa akin when summarizing a story, kasi nga you would like to tell to your audience as if they were there while experiencing the film. Habang binabasa raw nila yung summary, parang nandun daw sila experiencing the film. So parang yun yung present tense. Kaya sabi niya, it has to be presented in present tense kapag magsa-summarize daw tayo ng isang story. Ayun lang. So diyan kasi naka-past tense yan. Okay. This time is arguing with author.
Arguing with author. It is easy to give up on a film midway when it only provides worthless nonsense after worthless nonsense. After the nth time Pokwang rates just to enunciate her rabid desperation to get laid, it felt that Reyes' film is a hopeless piece of exploitative drivel. Sure, Empoy and Joy Viado managed to force out a few authentic chuckles. However, it all feels utterly lazy. Reyes has done this so many times before with all the films he directed for Vic Soto and the rest of his gang. Po Kwang has done this repeatedly in her shows and even in her interviews. Marudo is simply not suited for this kind of comedy. Simply put, there is just nothing about the first half of My Illegal Wife that would urge its audience to stay for more.
Okay, so that's an example of arguing with author. So kino-contradict niya ngayon yung point ng author. In this sense is the film, pero it's the same thing naman eh. It's the la it's it's the the genre that differs on. Okay? So arguing with author. This time is an example of intertextuality. Okay ba? Ako na magbabasa naman for you. Para makita nyo kung ano ba yung pinagsasabi kong intertextuality. So, James Joyce Ulysses. So, uh, I'm sure hindi pa tayo nakamove on kay Ulysses. Hey, James Joyce Ulysses is actually a novel written by James Joyce. James Joyce Ulysses was a deliberate retelling of Homer's Odyssey, but transplanted out of ancient Greece into modern-day Dublin. The various chapters in Joyce's novel correspond to the adventures of Odysseus in Homer's epic poem. For Joyce, the point of this deliberate intertextuality was to show that ordinary people can experience something heroic in their everyday lives. So, kaya bakit siya naging intertextuality? Kasi nag-reflect doon yung journey ni Odyssey doon sa life ni Ulysses doon sa kwento. So, nag-reflect. So, that is an example of intertextuality. Okay? So, kapag meron kayo nakitang isang literary works at napansin nyo, ay para may similarity to doon, pero hindi yun basta-basta. Makita mo lang similar o ganun. It has to be justified. One way of justifying that is by looking at the period when it was written. Sino bang mas nauna? Or you can also read the life of the author in order for you to justify na magre-reflect yung ganong style of writing ng writer doon sa isa or makikita doon yung similarity ng content doon sa isa by reading the background of the author. Baka mamaya kasi idol niya pala itong author na to, kaya talaga nagmamanifest sa kanya yung style of writing, yung content ng sinusulat niya. So, that's how intertextuality works. Okay? Then, we also have the so-called text identity when we talk of the reader response. Okay, so those are the different responses those are the different uh, responses to responses of a reader. This time, we'll be moving on to text identity. Ano ba yung sinasabi nating text identity? So first, it is imaginative literature that is lived by reader. So the identity of the text is defined by the imagination of the reader. Reader response nga kasi. Time reading of single text produces a great insight in the reader mind. Okay, so the more that the reader read a particular text, the more that magkakaroon siya na kanyang sariling interpretation. So, magkakaroon siya ngayon ng sariling identity doon sa text na binasa niya. Next, text alone is nothing as a unit but it completes its identity after the reader interpretation. Ito yung sinabi natin kanina sa salayan picture wherein once that the reader assimilate the literature, that is when the literature becomes fully created. Di ba nga na-mention natin kanina yun? Sabi ni Easer yon na once we assimilate a literature or a literary text, or once the reader assimilate the literary text, that is when a literature becomes fully created. Hence, it is now creating its own text identity in the reader's mind. So there are two kinds of meaning of a text. One is determinate, and the second one is indeterminate. So when we talk of determinate text, it is basically the facts in the text. So kung ano yung facts that are reflected in the text, we call it determinate text. It is indeterminate text when that there are gaps in the text which is filled by readers. Halimbawa, um, ito na yung point na kung saan kayo na ngayon yung bibigay ng meaning doon sa inyong nabasang text. Okay? So kayo ngayon nag-fill in ng meaning doon sa text na binasa nyo. We call it indeterminate text. So kapag determinate text, ito mismo yung facts na nabasa nyo. Okay? So kung in toto, literal, kung anong pagkakabasa mo doon sa text na binasa mo, yun mismo yung pagkakaunawa mo, that is a determinate text. But if you go beyond that, You interpret the actions, you interpret the dialogues, you give meaning to the interpretations, you analyze the interpretative text, then that's what makes it an indeterminate uh, text. So in reader response theory, indeterminate meaning are more focused. Okay? Dito nga ito ang more focus. This is where the reader response theory gives more emphasis in indeterminate text. Okay, kasi napaka-shallow lang nga naman kapag yung in toto kung ano nabasa mo sa text, yun na yun, napaka-shallow. Parang ang ginawa mo lang is there's no interpretation at all. Parang it's only just a plain summary or it's only just plainly retelling or reiterating what the story is all about or plainly just reading a text na nasa literal level ka lang. Pero kapag nandun ka sa interpretative level, and that where is reader response criticism can be reflected. Meron tayong tinatawag na types of reader. Meron tayong implied reader at yung mga actual reader. So, ano bang pinagkaiba ng implied reader tsaka actual reader? At alin kayo rito minsan? So, again, si Easer ang ating i-quote kasi siya yung nag-popularize nito. Si kay Wolfgang Iser. So, an implied reader is a hypothetical figure who is likely to get most of what the author intended. Pero pag sinabi nating actual reader, the actual reader who may eventually manage to get through the book, such as when one is struggling to enjoy it because the book is either too complex or they do not understand the metaphors and ironies which the author has written. Siguro, may comprehension pero hindi ganun ka-deep. Kaya nga sabi dyan, ah, who may eventually manage to get through the book such as when one is struggling to enjoy it because the book is either too complex. So nag-struggle siya to to understand a very complex text na binabasa niya. Now, how to write a criticism using a reader response approach. So, paano nga ba? Okay. So, techniques of reading reader. So, you can extract the meanings through experiencing the Bisaya man, experiencing. It could be hypothesizing, exploring, and synthesizing. Okay. So, balikan ko yun. So, experiencing. So, you can relate your personal experiences when you are dealing with the text. Okay? You relate your personal experiences when dealing with the text. You can hypothesize. Pag sinabi natin hypothesis, di ba? It's an educated guess. Okay? So, you can create an assumption with regard to what you read na baka kaya ganito ang ginawa ng isang character doon sa kwento dahil nga ganyan. With that, you are hypothesizing. Okay? Exploring. And of course, synthesizing. Synthesizing is when it's different from summarizing. Kasi in summarizing, pinagsama-sama mo lang. In synthesize, in summarizing, yung one text alone lang yung iyong uh, one text lang yung iyong tagni-tagni. Okay, in synthesizing kasi marami kang text na pinagtagni-tagni at saka relate mo ngayon doon sa iyong text na binabasa. Okay? And so your critical reading of a text asks you to explore why you or dislike the text. Pwede rin yun. Explain whether you agree or disagree with the author. Identify the purpose of the text and critique the text. So these are the things that you can do when you are exploring a particular text. Pero wag niyong sasabihin na, I don't like it. I like it. Wag naman ganun yung inyong pagkakasulat. Okay? So, how are you going to express na gusto mo siya at hindi mo siya gusto in a way na hindi mo gagamitin yung phrase na I like it and I dislike it or I agree with it or I disagree with it. Okay? How are you going to express that without using those phrases? And that's the challenge. Para naman magtunog scholarly at magtunog BSc English major yung inyong text na gagawin. Okay, ito pala yung sinasabi ko kanina. Do not use a standard approach of just writing. Halimbawa, I like this text because it's so cool and the ending made me feel happy. Napaka-shallow. I hated it because it was stupid and had nothing to do at all to do with my life. It was too negative and boring. 'Di ba? Do not use this kind of approach when you're using a reader response. Okay? So, write as a scholar, write as much as possible, be a scholar when you are uh, expressing your thoughts about the text that you read. So, for example, you can focus on, is the text racist, or does the text unreasonably puts down things such as religion or groups of people such as women or adolescents, conservatives or Democrats, etc. Napaka-wide nga kasi ng reader response. Does the text include factual errors or outright lies? It is too dark and despairing, or is it falsely positive? Okay, you can also make use of that kind of argument in when you're reading your text. Okay, you can also ask, is the text poorly written or does it contain too much verbal fat? Pag sinabi natin verbal fat, napakahaba ng sinasabi pero ano bang pinupunto mo? Verbal fat tawag natin nun. Is it too emotional or too childish? Okay, does it have too many facts and figures? Sometimes kasi too much facts and too much figures, boring na basahin. Are there typos or other errors in the text? You can also focus on that. Okay, pero hindi naman masyadong laging ito yung napupuna. Do the ideas wander around without making a point? Okay. Now, the structure of a reader response essay. Okay, reader response. So take note of this because I'm already giving you idea on how you're going to draft your reader response. Okay, so in the beginning paragraph of your reader response essay, be sure to mention the following: the title of the work to which you are responding, the author, and the main thesis of of the text. The main thesis of the text has something to do with what are you really trying to infer, or what you are really would like to to say in the text that you are reading, or that you had read. Then do your best to answer the questions given, that those questions that I have enumerated a while ago. And remember, however, that you are writing an essay, not filling out a short answer worksheet. So you don't need to work through these questions in order one by one in your essay. So rather, your paper as a whole should be sure to address these questions in some way. So although I mentioned of those things, of those questions, it does not necessarily mean that you have to focus on those questions, or you are fixed on those questions. Those are only just guide. Okay? That doesn't necessarily mean that susundan nyo sila in toto kung ano pagkakasunod-sunod. Again, they are only just your guide questions in order for you to come up with your um, reader response. Okay? So what does the text have to do with you? You can also make use of this kind of approach. What does the text have to do with you personally and with your life? Or you can also use other people's lives when relating your analysis. So it is not acceptable to write that the text has nothing to do with you, since just about everything humans can write has to do in some way with every other human. Okay? So how much does the text agree or clash with your view of the world and what you consider right and wrong? You can use several quotes as examples. Those quotes can come from can come from the text itself, or it could be pwedeng magpaka-intertextual doon sa iyong approach ng analysis mo by citing other sources in which you can relate your work from others' works. Okay? And you can use quotes example to discuss how the text disagrees with what you think about the world and about right and wrong. What did you learn? How much were your views and opinions challenged or changed by text, if at all? Did the text communicate with you? After all, it is a reader response, and it's as a response that is a way of communicating. How does the text communicate with you? Or how well does the text address things that you personally care about? And what can you praise about the text, and what problems did you have with it? Again, it should be a positive criticism, or a constructive criticism rather, that has to be taken into account when you're using these. Okay? For the conclusion, you might want to discuss your overall reaction to the text, whether you would read something else like this in the future, whether you would read something else by this author, or if you recommend reading the text to someone else and why. Okay? Pwede ganito mo i-end yung iyong reader response. So that's it for this afternoon. So thank you very much for taking time listening to our discussion.